for this meditation is found in the end of Luke in chapter 23. And you're going to think that this is an unusual passage to read at Christmas time, but stick with me. From Luke chapter 23, 2 other men, both criminals, were led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." The meditation today is on Good King Wencislas, but if you look at the first phrase in this wonderful hymn, Good King Wencislas looked out on the feast of Stephen. We know who Stephen is because he's in the book of Acts, and today is his feast day, or the day that Saint Stephen is celebrated. And there are many countries, especially in Europe, for whom today is a special holiday. Stephen was the first martyr. He was killed in the year 34. And because Pastor Susan has done so much teaching and preaching from the book of Acts, from the book of Acts, his story is familiar. But I'm going to read a few verses that will remind us exactly of who Stephen was. From chapter 6 of Acts. Now Stephen, a man full of God's grace and power, did great wonders and miraculous signs among the people. Opposition arose, however, from members of the synagogue of the freedmen, as it was called, Jews of Cyrene and Alexandria, as well as the provinces of Cilicia and Asia. These men began to argue with Stephen, but they could not stand up against his wisdom or the Spirit by whom he spoke. Then they secretly persuaded some men to say, "We have heard Stephen speak words of blasphemy against Moses and against God." So they stirred up the people and the elders and the teachers of the law. They seized Stephen and brought him before the Sanhedrin. They produced false witnesses who testified, "This fellow never stops speaking against this holy place and against the law. For we have heard him say that this Jesus of Nazareth will destroy this place and change the customs Moses handed down to us." All who were sitting in the Sanhedrin looked intently at Stephen, and they saw that his face was like the face of an angel. So the next chapter, chapter 7, records the speech that Stephen gave to the Sanhedrin, and I'm just going to read to you the very end of what he said. He was very persuasive and articulate in telling the Jewish people what their own history was. And he concluded with this: "You stiff-necked people with uncircumcised hearts and ears, you are just like your fathers. You always resist the Holy Spirit. Was there ever a prophet your fathers did not persecute? They even killed those who predicted the coming of the righteous one. And now you have betrayed and murdered him. You who have received the law that was put into effect through angels, but have not obeyed it." When they heard this, they were furious and gnashed their teeth at him. But Stephen, full of the Holy Spirit, looked up to heaven and saw the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. "Look," he said, "I see heaven open and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God." At this they covered their ears, and yelling at the top of their voices, they all rushed at him, dragging him out of the city, and began to stone him. Meanwhile, the witnesses laid their clothes at the feet of a young man named Saul. That is the martyrdom of Stephen in the year 34, and that is the setting that the hymn and carol Good King Wencislas begins. This is my favorite story behind a Christmas carol. I read it years ago in this book, Stories Behind the Best Loved Songs of Christmas by Ace Collins. There's no way that I could do a better job than he has done, so I'm just going to read it to you. Of all the ancient legends that surround Christmas, the tale about King Wencislas stands out. Though the carol was composed by noted songwriter and priest John Mason Neal, The song is based less on a writer's inspiration than on historical fact. King Wencislas was a real member of European royalty, a ruler who daily touched his subjects with Christian kindness and charity. For many in the Dark Ages, this king was the role model for Santa Claus. Today, over 1,000 years after his death, King Wencislas remains a role model for Christian people everywhere. The son of Duke Borovoy of Bohemia, Wencislas had the good fortune to be raised by his grandmother, Ludmilla. Ludmilla was a devoted Christian woman who taught her grandson the meaning of faith, hope, and charity. Wencislas took his grandmother's lessons to heart, and in the year 922, when Duke Borovoy was killed in battle, the youngster seemed ready to put what he had learned from his grandmother into action. At the tender age of 15, Wencislas, just a few minutes older than his twin brother Boleslas, was made the leader of Bohemia. As the young duke attempted to guide the troubled nation, his mother, Drahomira, and his brother, Boleslas, instituted a pagan revolt. They assassinated Ludmilla as she prayed, then attempted to overthrow Wencislas. The teen, he's 15 years old, the teen took charge, put down the rebellion, and in an act of Christian kindness, expelled his mother, Drahomira, and his brother Boleslas, rather than executing them. The tiny nation was amazed that the boy would react with such great mercy. With the wisdom of Solomon, the young duke set up a nation built on true justice and mercy. He enacted laws in the manner he thought would best serve his Lord. He even journeyed into the country, seeking insight as to what his people needed. When possible, he shared everything from firewood to meat with his subjects. He took pity on the poor and urged those blessed with wealth to reach out to those less fortunate. In large part due to Wenceslas's example, a host of pagan peasants turned to Christianity. It was a revival unlike any that had ever been seen in that country, and I know that even in our own day we are praying for revival. When Wencislas married and had a son, all of Bohemia celebrated. Peasants and powerful landlords sought the man out, offering their prayers for long life and happiness. With a smile on his face, the leader assured them that he was praying for their happiness as well. In the years that followed, the Duke and his subjects continued to share both their prayers and their blessings with one another each day. Rarely had a leader been as universally revered as was Wencislas. And Wencislas loved Christmas. Centuries before gift-giving became a part of the holiday tradition, the young leader embraced the joy of sharing his bounty with others, inspired by a sincere spirit of compassion. Each Christmas Eve, the Duke sought out the most needy of his subjects and visited them. With his pages at his side, Wencislas brought food, firewood, and clothing. After greeting all in the household, the Duke would continue to the next stop. Though often faced with harsh weather conditions, Wencislas never postponed his rounds. Like a 10th century Saint Nick, the kindly young man made the night before Christmas special for scores of families. For many, a Christmas Eve from the Duke was an answered prayer and a special reason to celebrate the birth of Jesus. In the year 929, when Wencislas was just 22 years old, he was on his way to church for his daily prayers. As he greeted his subjects and took time to ask about their health, the warm look on the man's face assured each of them that he cared deeply about their welfare. Smiling and shouting greetings, he continued to the chapel. Just before entering, he heard a familiar voice. Turning, he must have been surprised when his brother Boleslas greeted him. As a confused look crossed the Duke's face, Boleslas' confederates ran up to Wencislas and stabbed him to death. Falling to his knees on the church steps, the dying ruler looked up and whispered, "Brother, may God forgive you." And then he died. It was a group of powerful pagan leaders who had supported Boleslav's overthrow of Wencislas. Amazingly, when the young man Boleslas realized what he had done, the new duke turned away from his colleagues and he embraced the faith of Christianity that had guided his brother's life and rule. Though he had planned the revolt that had killed his twin, it was Boleslas who sustained the legend of Wencislas. Thanks to the man who killed his brother, the crown of Wencislas became the symbol of the Czech nation. And I read somewhere else that Boleslas continued the tradition of Christian charity that his brother had started. And as he started to become famous, he took on his brother's name, Wencislas, so that people would remember his brother's name and not his own. John Mason Neale, the priest and songwriter who wrote the hymn, closely identified with Wencislas, and that he too reached out to saint and sinner alike. Though often rebuked by Christians, Neale constantly tried to reform prostitutes, thieves, and even murderers. Any man or woman who ventured into his path felt the Englishman's loving touch. When not involved in his mission outreach, Neale spent a great deal of time reviewing ancient Latin songs and text, often translating them into English for use in church services. One of the stories he came across was the biography of Wencislas. Sensing that the Duke would make a wonderful role model for children, Neale rewrote the old tale in verse, making the Duke a king, and matching his lyrics to a Latin melody. If anybody speaks Latin, please forgive me. Tempus adest floridum. It now seems ironic that Neale's Christmas carol would be sung to a tune that, when translated, meant this: spring has unwrapped her flowers. Yet because Wencislas brought his poor subjects a breath of fresh air and warmth to the darkest winter days, perhaps Neale's choice was no accident. When published, Good King Wencislas quickly became a holiday favorite in Europe. By the last part of the 19th century, it was sung throughout the United States as well. This carol was largely responsible for making the legend of Wencislas known throughout the world, as it touched upon the Bohemian saints' examples of faith, hope, and charity. Suddenly, the symbol of Czech independence became the crown jewel of Christian living. One of the most telling facets of the Duke's legendary life can be found in the final verse of Good King Wencislas. In the carol, the king reminds his page that when a person is alone, life is dark and bleak. But when a person reaches out to others, like Christ reached out to those in need, then that person never walks alone. Christ and those who have been touched by kindness are there to make each step of the journey easier and brighter. Just as the page's walk was made easier by following in the king's footsteps, so the king's way was made easier by following in the steps of Christ. Wencislas and Neale both held positions of importance. Either could have chosen to be served by others, yet each instead devoted their lives to service. Both understood the tenets of faith, hope, and charity, and throughout their lives reached out to others with compassion and love. Now the carol Good King Wencislas reminds the world that the spirit of Christmas giving did not begin with Santa Claus, nor should it end there. It can be alive in all those who choose to give with love and live by faith. And now we will sing Good King Wencislas.